Now we're going to explain a bit about the tactile sense or our touch sense. For this sense, we have receptors all over our skin. So we'll start by looking at children who are over-responsive within this sense. And this means that they're getting too much from this, too much tactile information being processed in their brain. So some of the things we might see, it's very typically a lot of children find it challenging to wear clothing, perhaps labels can feel very uncomfortable. They may need to be cut out. Seams on socks or tights can feel uncomfortable. It has been described for some children who are very tactile defensive or over-responsive in this sense as feeling scratching or as hurting them. It's very uncomfortable. So imagine feeling like that and then having to try and concentrate on your schoolwork or what have you. So it can have a big effect. So it can be quite important to consider the type of fabrics, and depending on the age of your child, and if you can do this, involve them in that process as much as you can to get something that they're comfortable wearing. We also do talk about quite a bit, you may have heard it, the prepare, predict, control, finish approach. And that is just a way of preparing the child and making things predictable and basically giving them a bit more control so that they feel more comfortable and can tolerate these things a bit better. Having a designated spot perhaps at school, so if you're over-responsive within the tactile sense, often it can be challenging in a classroom environment because there's the hustle, the bustle of the other children are unpredictable, they might not want to be bumped into and bashed. So having a designated time for carpet time, a spot on the floor, designated spot for them can be helpful. Or perhaps even when they're lining up to go to assembly, have them be the person who opens the door, or if that needs to be shared out with other children, having them at the front of the line or at the end of the line so they're not getting bumped into as much. So there's some quite simple strategies, things like school can put in place that can make quite a big difference for these children. A really important one is when you do need to touch a child who is over-responsive within this sense, is use firm touch. So it might be tempting because you know they don't like touch to do a light touch to get their attention, but actually that can feel really alerting for them and quite uncomfortable. So doing firm touch and deep pressure when you do need to get their attention or touch them, then that can be much more acceptable for them. So alternatively, if your child is under-responsive within this sense or they're not getting enough tactile information to the brain, you're going to see lots of seeking behaviours, so constantly touching the environment, things around them, they can't seem to help themselves, they're fiddling all the time, and perhaps fidgeting as well. You might see some more almost like self-harming type behaviours with the biting, pinching, kicking out, if they're getting frustrated with that. Often as well, linked in with the tactile sense is pain and temperature as well. So you may notice that your child has a different pain, like a higher pain threshold. And absolutely seeking out lots of rough and tumble play, lots of that. So the kind of things we can do if they're not getting enough, let them have fiddles and something in class that might help them with concentrating. It's a fine balance, getting something that isn't too distracting, but something they can fiddle and play with so that they can have their concentration, meet that tactile, that touch need. Similarly, things like squeezing, a stress ball can be helpful. Deep pressure and proprioception can really help with the children with these difficulties too, and we'll move on to that a bit more detail shortly. With thinking about we need to give them opportunities for lots of tactile experiences, so think about their toys, their bedding, their clothing, so lots of things that are quite textured, different textures, so they're getting more of that feedback. If we're needing to teach teach them about appropriate touch if they're seeking to touch things and people all the time. Social stories can be quite useful as a way of just educating appropriate touch. So a social story is making it more personal to your child. So pick out a particular situation that they find really challenging. You can use pictures or photographs and make out a story of it, just to help explain and communicate and educate around that, whatever the particular challenge or activity you're choosing to select for your child.